April 15, 1944. Stalag Luft III, Sagen, Germany. The biting wind whipped across the snow-covered landscape, stinging Sergeant Kruger's face as he patrolled the perimeter fence. The guard towers loomed like skeletal giants against the gray sky, their searchlights cutting through the gloom. You could almost taste the tension in the air, a constant undercurrent in this prison camp holding captured Allied airmen. Kruger shivered, pulling his greatcoat tighter, and continued his rounds, the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the frozen ground the only sound besides the distant bark of a dog. Inside the camp, life was a monotonous cycle of roll call, meager rations, and endless waiting. For the prisoners, mostly British and American airmen, boredom was as much an enemy as the guards. They spent their days devising games, telling stories, and most importantly, planning their escape. Today, however, something was different. As Kruger approached Barrack 104, he noticed an unusual gathering near the latrines. A group of prisoners huddled together, their voices hushed, their faces etched with a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. Kruger frowned. Such gatherings were forbidden, and he quickened his pace, his hand instinctively moving towards the pistol holstered at his hip. "Was is los hirer?" he barked, his voice cutting through the cold air. The prisoners scattered like startled birds, their eyes darting nervously. Kruger scanned the area, his gaze settling on a discarded cigarette butt and a crumpled piece of paper. He picked up the paper. It was a crude drawing of a German soldier, but something about it felt off. The uniform was slightly wrong, the face a little too smug. Kruger pocketed the drawing and continued his patrol, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Prisoner's furtive behavior, the strange drawing, it all pointed to something beyond the usual petty mischief. He decided to report his suspicions to Hauptmann Schmidt, the camp's security officer. Schmidt, a stern, meticulous man, listened patiently to Kruger's report, his brow furrowed. "A drawing, you say, and a gathering near the latrines. Perhaps they were simply gambling, Kruger. Airmen are known for their resourcefulness." "Perhaps, Herr Hauptmann," Kruger replied, "but I have a feeling this is something more." Schmidt sighed. He had dealt with countless escape attempts, petty thefts, and acts of insubordination. The airmen were a constant nuisance, but he couldn't afford to dismiss Kruger's concerns. "Very well, Kruger, investigate, but do not disrupt the routine. I do not want to cause unnecessary unrest." Kruger saluted and left Schmidt's office, his mind already formulating a plan. He knew he couldn't rely on brute force. He needed to be subtle, to observe, to listen. He would start by scrutinizing the prisoners in Barrack 104, looking for any clues that might reveal their secret. Back in Barrack 104, Flight Lieutenant David Baker watched Kruger disappear around the corner. He exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. The drawing, a careless mistake. He had warned them to be more careful, but some of the men were getting complacent. "He's gone," Baker said, his voice barely a whisper. "But he saw the drawing. He knows something is up." Sergeant Miller, a burly Yorkshireman with a knack for forgery, wiped his brow with a trembling hand. "Blimey, Dave, what do we do now? If they find out about the studio was their secret, their lifeline, their most ambitious project yet. Hidden behind a false wall in the back of the barrack, it was a clandestine workshop where they meticulously crafted fake identity documents, maps, and even German uniforms. The goal was audacious: to create enough documentation to allow a large group of prisoners to escape under the guise of ordinary German workers. Baker looked around the barrack, his eyes meeting the worried faces of his fellow prisoners. He knew the risks were immense. If caught, they faced severe punishment, possibly even execution. But the thought of freedom, of returning to their homes and families, was worth any risk. "We carry on," Baker said, his voice firm despite his inner turmoil. "We have to. We're too close to give up now." He knew it wouldn't be easy. Kruger's suspicions would make their work even more dangerous. But they had to find a way to outsmart him, to protect their secret, to keep their dream of escape alive. The next day, Kruger began his investigation. He started by observing the prisoners in Barrack 104, paying close attention to their movements, their conversations, their habits. He learned their names, their backgrounds, their strengths and weaknesses. He noticed that a small group of men seemed to be particularly close, always whispering together, always keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Baker, the flight lieutenant, seemed to be their leader, a quiet, intelligent man with a steely determination in his eyes. Miller, the burly sergeant, was always by Baker's side, his large frame radiating a sense of quiet strength. And then there was Private Evans, a young, nervous man with a talent for drawing. Kruger focused his attention on Evans. The drawing he had found was clearly the work of an amateur, but it had a certain skill. He suspected that Evans might be the key to unlocking the mystery. One afternoon, Kruger approached Evans as he was sweeping the courtyard. "Private Evans, is it?" Kruger said, his voice casual. "I understand you have a talent for drawing." Evans froze, his eyes widening in fear. I don't know what you mean, sir," he stammered. "Oh, I think you do," Kruger said, his voice hardening. "I saw the drawing. When you left near the latrines, it was quite revealing." Evans paled. He knew he was in trouble. "It was just a joke, sir," he pleaded. "A harmless prank," Kruger smirked. "Is that so? Then you wouldn't mind drawing something for me, would you? A portrait of Hauptmann Schmidt, perhaps?" Evans hesitated. He knew that drawing the Hauptmann would be a risky move. It would draw attention to his artistic abilities, and it might raise suspicions among his fellow prisoners. But he couldn't refuse Kruger's request. He had no choice but to play along. "Of course, sir," Evans said, his voice trembling. "I'd be happy to." Over the next few days, Evans worked on the portrait of Hauptmann Schmidt, meticulously capturing every detail of his stern face. Kruger watched him closely, his eyes searching for any sign of deception. As Evans worked, he surreptitiously tried to send signals to Baker and Miller, warning them of Kruger's interest. But Kruger was always nearby, his presence a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Meanwhile, Baker and Miller were frantically trying to find a way to protect the studio. They knew that Kruger was getting closer to the truth, and they had to act quickly. They considered moving the studio to a new location, but that would be too risky. They decided to focus on strengthening the false wall, making it even more difficult to detect. They also started spreading rumors among the other prisoners, suggesting that Kruger was simply trying to intimidate them, that he had no real evidence of any wrongdoing. They hoped to create a sense of complacency, to lull Kruger into a false sense of security. But Kruger was not fooled. He could sense the prisoners' fear, their desperation. He knew that they were hiding something, and he was determined to find out what it was. One evening, as Kruger was patrolling the inside of Barrack 104, he noticed something unusual about the back wall. The light seemed to reflect off it in a slightly different way than the other walls. He approached the wall, his hand reaching out to touch it. As his fingers brushed against the surface, he felt a slight vibration, a subtle difference in texture. He pressed harder, his eyes narrowing. The wall felt hollow. Kruger's heart pounded in his chest. He had found it. The secret the prisoners were so desperately trying to protect. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the barrack. The prisoners were watching him, their faces pale with fear. "What is behind this wall?" Kruger demanded, his voice ringing through the barrack. The prisoners remained silent, their eyes fixed on the floor. Kruger stepped forward, his hand reaching for the hidden latch he knew must be there. He ran his hand along the wall, feeling for any irregularity. Finally, his fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible indentation. He pressed down, and with a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Kruger drew his pistol and stepped through the opening, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He found himself in a small, cramped room filled with the tools of forgery, printing presses, inks, paints, and stacks of fake identity documents. He had found the studio. Kruger felt a surge of triumph. He had solved the mystery, uncovered the prisoner's secret plan. He turned to leave the studio, his mind already racing with plans to arrest the prisoners and shut down their operation. But as he reached the opening, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. On the far wall of the studio, partially obscured by a stack of documents, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. Kruger frowned. He hadn't noticed the box before. He approached it cautiously, his pistol still raised. He opened the box, and his eyes widened in disbelief. Inside the box were dozens of perfectly crafted fake identity cards. But these weren't just any identity cards. They were German identity cards belonging to high-ranking officers in the Wehrmacht. Kruger picked up one of the cards, examining it closely. The photograph on the card was of a man he knew well, Generalfeldmarschall Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself. Kruger felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary forgery operation. This was something far more sinister, far more dangerous. He had stumbled upon something that could shake the very foundations of the German war effort. He looked around the studio again, his eyes searching for any clue that might explain the purpose of the fake identity cards. He noticed a small, leather-bound diary lying on a table. He picked it up and began to read. The diary was written in a coded language, a series of numbers and symbols that Kruger couldn't decipher. But as he flipped through the pages, he noticed something else. A recurring symbol, a stylized image of a serpent coiled around a sword. Kruger recognized the symbol. It was the insignia of the Schlange, the Black Serpent, a secret society rumored to exist within the ranks of the German military. A society dedicated to overthrowing the Nazi regime and establishing a new order. Kruger's mind reeled. He suddenly understood the true scope of the prisoners' operation. They weren't just trying to escape. They were working with the Black Serpent, providing them with the means to infiltrate the highest levels of the German military. But why? What was their ultimate goal? And who were the key players in this conspiracy? Kruger knew he had to report his findings to Hauptmann Schmidt immediately. But he also knew that he couldn't trust anyone. The Black Serpent might have infiltrated the camp staff, and anyone he spoke to could be a member. He decided to keep his discovery to himself for now. He needed to gather more evidence, to identify the key players, to unravel the conspiracy before it was too late. He carefully placed the diary and the identity card back in the box and closed it. He replaced the box on the shelf, making sure it was hidden from view. He took a deep breath and stepped back through the opening in the wall, his face betraying nothing of the turmoil raging inside him. He addressed the prisoners, his voice calm and controlled. "I have seen enough. You will all be confined to your barracks. There will be no rations tonight." He turned and walked away, leaving the prisoners to their fear and uncertainty. He knew he was walking a dangerous path, but he had no choice. He had to expose the conspiracy, to stop the Black Serpent before they could bring down the entire German war machine. Back in his office, Kruger locked the door and sat down at his desk. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write, carefully documenting his findings. He knew that this was the most important mission of his life, a mission that could determine the fate of the war. As he wrote, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were following his every move. He glanced nervously around the room, but he saw nothing. He continued writing, his hand moving faster and faster, his mind racing with thoughts and questions. He knew he was running out of time. The Black Serpent was powerful, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened their plans. Suddenly, he heard a soft knock on the door. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his pistol. "Who is it?" he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. "It is I, Hauptmann Schmidt," a voice replied. "I need to speak with you, Kruger. It is urgent." Kruger hesitated. He didn't trust Schmidt. He suspected that he might be involved in the conspiracy, but he couldn't refuse his superior officer. He took a deep breath and unlocked the door. Schmidt stepped inside, his face grim. "Kruger," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I have received a disturbing report. It seems that there is a traitor in our midst, someone who is working with the enemy." Kruger's heart pounded in his chest. He knew what Schmidt was talking about. He was about to be exposed. "Who is it, Herr Hauptmann?" Kruger asked, his voice trembling slightly. Schmidt stepped closer, his eyes locking with Kruger's. "The report says that the traitor is you, Kruger." Kruger was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had been framed. The Black Serpent had turned the tables on him. "That's not true, Herr Hauptmann," Kruger protested, his voice rising in panic. "I swear I am loyal to the Führer." Schmidt shook his head. "I'm afraid the evidence is overwhelming, Kruger. We found a coded message in your locker, a message that implicates you in a plot to sabotage the camp." Kruger knew he was doomed. He had been set up, and there was nothing he could do to prove his innocence. "What are you going to do, Herr Hauptmann?" Kruger asked, his voice resigned. Schmidt sighed. "I have no choice, Kruger. I must arrest you. You will be interrogated, and if you are found guilty, you will be executed." Kruger nodded. He knew that was his fate. He had stumbled upon a conspiracy that was too big, too powerful. And now he was going to pay the price. Schmidt reached for his pistol, his face filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Kruger," he said, "but I have no choice." Suddenly, before Schmidt could draw his weapon, the door to the office burst open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. It was Baker, the flight lieutenant, and he was holding a pistol. "Don't move, Schmidt," Baker shouted, his voice ringing through the room. "Drop your weapon or I'll shoot." Schmidt froze, his eyes widening in shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A prisoner armed and inside his office. It was impossible, but it was happening, and he knew that Baker was serious. He slowly lowered his pistol to the floor. "What is the meaning of this, Baker?" Schmidt demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "I'm here to save Kruger," Baker replied, his eyes fixed on Schmidt. "He's innocent. You're the one who's the traitor." Schmidt laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Baker. I'm a loyal officer of the Wehrmacht. I would never betray my country." "That's not what the diary says," Baker replied, holding up a leather-bound book. "The diary you thought was safely hidden in the studio." Schmidt's face paled. He recognized the diary. It was the one that contained the coded messages, the one that revealed the secrets of the Black Serpent. "Where did you get that?" Schmidt asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Kruger found it," Baker replied. "He knows everything. About the Black Serpent, about your plan to sabotage the camp, about your betrayal of the Fuhrer." Schmidt knew he was finished. He had been exposed. His carefully constructed plan had been shattered. He lunged for his pistol, but Baker was too quick. He fired, and a bullet slammed into Schmidt's chest. Schmidt crumpled to the floor, dead. Baker turned to Kruger, his face grim. "We have to get out of here," he said. "They'll be coming for us soon." Kruger nodded. He knew that Baker was right. They had to escape, to expose the Black Serpent, to clear his name. But as they turned to leave the office, they heard a noise outside. The sound of boots running towards the door. They were trapped. Baker quickly barricaded the door with a heavy desk, buying them precious seconds. "There's a window in the back," he said, pointing to a small, grimy window overlooking the courtyard. "We can try to escape that way." Kruger nodded and followed Baker to the window. They smashed the glass and climbed through, landing on the snow-covered ground below. They ran across the courtyard, dodging searchlights and gunfire. They knew they couldn't stay in the camp. They had to find a way to get out, to reach the Allied lines, to tell their story. As they reached the perimeter fence, they saw a figure waiting for them in the shadows. A woman dressed in a German nurse's uniform. It was Nurse Greta, the camp medic. She had been helping the prisoners for months, providing them with medicine, information, and hope. "I'm here to help you escape," Greta said, her voice low and urgent. "I have a plan." Kruger and Baker exchanged glances. They didn't know if they could trust her, but they had no choice. They were desperate. "What's the plan?" Kruger asked. Greta pointed to a small, seemingly innocuous shed near the fence. "There's a tunnel beneath that shed," she said. "It leads outside the camp. I've been digging it for months with the help of some of the prisoners." Kruger and Baker were amazed. They had no idea that Greta had been working on such a project. "But why?" Kruger asked. "Why are you helping us?" Greta smiled. "Because I believe in freedom," she said. "And I believe that the Black Serpent must be stopped." Kruger nodded. He understood. Greta was a fellow traveler, a secret ally in the fight against the Nazi regime. "Let's go," Baker said, his voice firm. "We don't have much time." They followed Greta to the shed and climbed down into the tunnel. It was dark and cramped, but they pressed on, their hearts filled with hope. As they crawled through the tunnel, Kruger couldn't help but wonder about the Black Serpent. Who were they? What were their plans? And how far would they go to achieve their goals? He knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, an enemy that had infiltrated the highest levels of the German military. But he also knew that they couldn't give up. They had to expose the conspiracy, to stop the Black Serpent before they could bring down the entire world. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. Greta pushed open a hidden door, and they emerged into the darkness outside the camp. They were free. But their journey was far from over. They still had to evade the German patrols, to reach the Allied lines, to tell their story. As they began to run, Kruger noticed something strange about the landscape around them. Trees seemed to be arranged in a peculiar pattern, a pattern he recognized from the diary he had found in the studio. It was a map. The trees were marking the location of something. But what Kruger stopped running and looked around, his eyes searching for the key to the puzzle. He realized that the trees were pointing towards a small, abandoned farmhouse in the distance. "That farmhouse," Kruger said, pointing towards the building. "There's something important there. I can feel it." Baker and Greta exchanged glances. They didn't know what to expect, but they trusted Kruger's instincts. They made their way towards the farmhouse, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that they were walking into a trap, but they had no choice. They had to find out what was hidden inside the farmhouse. As they approached the building, they noticed that the windows were boarded up and the door was locked. The farmhouse seemed deserted, but Kruger could sense that someone was inside, watching them. They cautiously approached the door and tried to open it, but it was firmly locked. They kicked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. Finally, Baker pulled out his pistol and fired a shot at the lock. The lock shattered and they pushed open the door, stepping into the darkness inside. The farmhouse was musty and damp, filled with cobwebs and dust. The air was thick with the smell of decay. They moved cautiously through the rooms, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. They found nothing of interest: a broken chair, a rusty stove, a pile of old newspapers. They were about to give up, to leave the farmhouse empty-handed, when Kruger noticed something unusual about the floor in the main room. There was a small, almost invisible crack running across the floorboards. Kruger knelt down and examined the crack closely. He realized that it wasn't just a crack. It was a seam. The floorboards had been cut, and a section of the floor was removable. Kruger grabbed the edge of the floorboard and pulled. With a groan, the section of the floor lifted up, revealing a dark, narrow opening beneath. It was a hidden cellar. Kruger, Baker, and Greta exchanged nervous glances. They didn't know what to expect down there, but they knew that they had to find out. Kruger took a deep breath and climbed down into the cellar, followed by Baker and Greta. The cellar was dark and damp, filled with the smell of mildew and earth. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they began to make out the shapes of objects in the cellar. There were crates, boxes, and barrels, all neatly stacked against the walls. They cautiously moved through the cellar, examining the contents of the containers. They found canned food, medical supplies, and ammunition, but nothing that seemed particularly important. They were about to give up, to conclude that the cellar was just a storage room, when Kruger noticed a small, wooden chest tucked away in a corner. He approached the chest and opened it. Inside, he found a stack of documents, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped the documents and began to read. As he read, his eyes widened in horror. The documents were a detailed plan for the assassination of several high-ranking Allied leaders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The plan was meticulously crafted, outlining the methods, the timing, and the personnel involved. It was clear that the Black Serpent was planning to strike a devastating blow against the Allied war effort. Kruger looked at Baker and Greta, his face pale with shock. "We have to get these documents to the Allies," he said. "This could change the course of the war." But as he spoke, they heard a noise above them. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Someone was in the farmhouse. They quickly extinguished the lantern they had been using to light the cellar, plunging the room into darkness. They huddled together, their hearts pounding in their chests. The footsteps grew closer and they could hear voices speaking in German. They were surrounded. Suddenly, a trapdoor in the ceiling of the cellar swung open and a figure appeared in the opening, silhouetted against the light. "Come out, Kruger," the figure shouted. "We know you're down there. There's nowhere to run." Kruger recognized the voice. It was Colonel Dietrich, the commander of the local Gestapo detachment. He was one of the most ruthless and feared men in the region. Kruger knew they were trapped. They had no chance of escaping, but he wasn't going to give up without a fight. He grabbed his pistol and pointed it towards the trapdoor. "Come and get us, Dietrich," he shouted. "We're ready for you." Dietrich laughed. "You're a fool, Kruger," he said. "You can't win. There are dozens of us and only 3 of you." "Maybe," Kruger replied, "but we're going to take as many of you with us as we can." Suddenly, a grenade came hurtling down through the trapdoor, landing on the floor of the cellar. Kruger, Baker, and Greta dove for cover as the grenade exploded, filling the cellar with smoke and debris. When the smoke cleared, they were all still alive, but they were badly wounded. Kruger's arm was bleeding, Baker had a gash on his head, and Greta was coughing up blood. They knew they couldn't stay in the cellar. They had to get out to fight their way to freedom. Kruger took a deep breath and charged towards the trapdoor, firing his pistol as he ran. He managed to hit one of the Gestapo officers, sending him tumbling backwards. But the other officers were waiting for him, and they opened fire, riddling his body with bullets. Kruger fell to the floor, dead. Baker and Greta watched in horror as Kruger was killed. They knew they were next, but they weren't going to give up. They were going to fight to the death. They grabbed their weapons and charged towards the trapdoor, firing as they ran. They managed to kill several more Gestapo officers, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Baker was shot in the chest and collapsed to the floor, dead. Greta was the only one left. She knew she couldn't win, but she wasn't going to surrender. She grabbed a Molotov cocktail from a nearby crate and lit it. She held the flaming bottle above her head and charged towards the trapdoor, screaming at the top of her lungs. The Gestapo officers recoiled in fear as Greta approached, her face contorted with rage. She hurled the Molotov cocktail at them and the bottle shattered, showering them with flaming gasoline. The officers screamed in agony as the flames engulfed them. They stumbled backwards, their bodies burning. Greta watched as the officers writhed in pain, her face filled with satisfaction. She had taken them with her. But as she stood there, watching the officers burn, she was shot in the back by another Gestapo officer. She fell to the floor, dead. The farmhouse was silent, except for the crackling of the flames and the groaning of the dying men. The Black Serpent had won. Or had they? In the chaos and confusion of the battle, one small detail had gone unnoticed. As Kruger fell, mortally wounded, he had clutched the documents detailing the assassination plot to his chest. Even in death, he had protected them. And now those documents lay hidden beneath his lifeless body, waiting to be discovered. But who would find them? And what would they do with them? The answer lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. Days later, a patrol of German soldiers stumbled upon the ruins of the farmhouse. The building had been gutted by fire, and the bodies of the Gestapo officers lay scattered among the debris. The soldiers searched the ruins, looking for clues to what had happened. They found nothing except for the body of a dead man, lying face down in the dirt. The soldiers turned the body over and examined it. They recognized the man. It was Sergeant Kruger, the security officer from Stalag Luft III. The soldiers searched Kruger's body, looking for identification. They found nothing except for a crumpled piece of paper clutched tightly in his hand. The soldiers carefully pried the paper from Kruger's grasp and unfolded it. It was a photograph. The photograph was of a woman. The woman was smiling, her eyes filled with love. She was wearing a German nurse's uniform. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single word, Greta. The soldiers looked at each other, their faces filled with confusion. Who was Greta? And what was her connection to Sergeant Kruger? They decided to take the photograph back to their commanding officer, hoping that he could shed some light on the mystery. The commanding officer examined the photograph and recognized the woman immediately. It was Nurse Greta, the camp medic from Stalag Luft III. The commanding officer knew that Greta had been helping the prisoners for months. He had suspected her of being a traitor, but he had never been able to prove it. Now he had his proof. He ordered his soldiers to search Greta's quarters, looking for evidence of her collaboration with the enemy. The soldiers searched Greta's room thoroughly, but they found nothing. The room was clean and tidy, with no sign of any wrongdoing. They were about to give up, to conclude that Greta was innocent, when one of the soldiers noticed something unusual about the floorboards beneath her bed. The floorboards were loose and they could be lifted up. The soldiers lifted up the floorboards and peered into the darkness beneath. They saw a small wooden box hidden in the space between the floor and the ground. The soldiers pulled the box out and opened it. Inside, they found a stack of documents, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. The soldiers unwrapped the documents and began to read. As they read, their eyes widened in horror. The documents were a detailed plan for the assassination of several high-ranking Allied leaders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The soldiers knew that they had stumbled upon something incredibly important. They had found the proof they needed to expose the Black Serpent and stop their deadly plan. But as they prepared to leave Greta's room, they noticed something else. A small, almost invisible inscription carved into the underside of the bed frame. They peered closer and read the inscription. It was a single word, written in a delicate script, "Hope." The soldiers looked at each other, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. They didn't understand the meaning of the word, but they knew that it was significant. They carefully documented the inscription and then left the room, carrying the documents with them. They knew that they had a long and dangerous journey ahead of them. They had to get the documents to the Allied leaders to warn them of the impending danger. But as they stepped out of the camp and into the darkness, they realized that they were being watched. From the shadows, a figure emerged, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was a woman dressed in a German officer's uniform. She stepped forward, her face grim. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave," she said, her voice cold and hard. "The Black Serpent has plans for those documents." The soldiers knew that they were in grave danger. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't going to give up. They were going to fight to the death to protect the documents, to save the Allied leaders. One of the soldiers reached for his pistol, but the woman was too quick. She drew her weapon and fired, hitting the soldier in the chest. The soldier fell to the ground, dead. The other soldier knew that he was next. He had no chance of winning. But he wasn't going to surrender. He was going to die fighting. He charged towards the woman, firing his pistol as he ran. The woman dodged the bullets and fired back, hitting the soldier in the leg. The soldier stumbled and fell to the ground, writhing in pain. The woman approached him, her face filled with contempt. "You were a fool to resist," she said. "Now you will die." She raised her pistol and pointed it at the soldier's head. But before she could fire, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Stop," the voice shouted. "Don't kill him." The woman hesitated, her finger on the trigger. She turned towards the source of the voice, her eyes narrowing. Standing in the shadows was a man dressed in a German general's uniform. The woman recognized the man immediately. It was General von Eisen, one of the highest-ranking officers in the German army. "General von Eisen," the woman said, her voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Von Eisen stepped forward, his face grim. "I'm here to stop you," he said. "I know about your plans, about the assassination plot. I won't let you carry it out." The woman laughed. "You're too late, General," she said. "The plan is already in motion. There's nothing you can do to stop it." Von Eisen shook his head. "I won't let you destroy everything," he said. "I won't let you betray our country," the woman sneered. "Our country? You're a fool, General. There is no our country, there is only power, and the Black Serpent will soon have it all." Von Eisen sighed. "I'm sorry it has to come to this," he said, "but I have no choice." He drew his pistol and pointed it at the woman. "I order you to surrender," he said. "In the name of the German army." The woman laughed again. "You can't order me, General," she said. "I am beyond your authority." She raised her pistol and pointed it at Von Eisen. "Goodbye, General," she said. "It has been a pleasure." She pulled the trigger. But before she could fire, Von Eisen moved with lightning speed. He lunged forward, knocking the woman off balance. The woman's shot went wild, hitting the ground harmlessly. Von Eisen wrestled the pistol from the woman's hand and threw it away. The woman screamed in rage and lunged at Von Eisen, clawing and scratching at his face. Von Eisen fought back, grabbing the woman's arms and twisting them behind her back. The woman screamed in pain. Von Eisen held her tightly, his face grim. "It's over," he said. "You've lost." But the woman wasn't finished. She twisted and turned, trying to break free from Von Eisen's grasp. Suddenly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver knife. She plunged the knife into Von Eisen's back. Von Eisen gasped in pain and staggered backwards, releasing his grip on the woman. The woman smiled triumphantly. She had won. She turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Von Eisen collapsed to the ground, his body racked with pain. The soldier who had been shot in the leg crawled towards him, his face filled with concern. "General," the soldier said. "Are you all right?" Von Eisen shook his head. "I'm dying," he said. "But it doesn't matter. You have to get those documents to the Allied leaders. You have to warn them about the assassination plot." The soldier nodded. "I will, General," he said. "I promise." Von Eisen smiled weakly. "Thank you," he said. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Hope," he whispered. And then he died. The soldier lay on the ground, his leg throbbing with pain. He knew that he was in grave danger. The woman could return at any moment and finish him off, but he wasn't going to give up. He was going to fulfill his promise to General von Eisen. He was going to get those documents to the Allied leaders. He reached out and grabbed the documents, clutching them tightly in his hand. Then he began to crawl, slowly and painfully, towards the nearest road. He knew that it was a long shot, but he had to try. He crawled for hours, his body aching with exhaustion. He was about to give up, to succumb to the pain and the despair, when he heard a sound in the distance. The sound of an engine. He looked up and saw a jeep approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness. He knew that this was his last chance. He had to get the attention of the people in the jeep. He gathered all of his remaining strength and shouted at the top of his lungs. "Help!" he screamed. "Help me! I have information about an assassination plot." The jeep slowed down and stopped. The people inside looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. The soldier crawled towards the jeep, waving his arms frantically. Finally, the people in the jeep saw him. They jumped out and ran towards him. There the air crackled with a mix of hope and despair. Allied prisoners of war, starving, wounded but alive, huddled in the back of the jeep as it careened down a dirt road. The American soldier, his leg a bloody mess, pointed weakly ahead. "Take me to the farmhouse. Coordinates in my pocket." His voice faded and his grip loosened. The driver, a hardened sergeant named O'Malley, barked orders. "Doc, patch him up. Mac, get those coordinates." The jeep lurched to a halt before a dilapidated farmhouse, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the stormy night. O'Malley, a veteran of countless battles, felt a shiver crawl down his spine. This place reeked of death. Mac, a young, eager lieutenant, unfolded the crumpled paper. "Sir, the coordinates match this farmhouse." O'Malley nodded grimly. "All right, let's move. Weapons hot. This ain't no picnic." Inside, the scene was gruesome. Blood stained the floor, bullet holes riddled the walls, and the air hung heavy with the stench of gasoline and burnt flesh. O'Malley, hardened as he was, felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This was more than just a firefight. It was a massacre. Mac pointed to a body lying near a hole in the floor. "Sir, look at this." It was a German soldier, his uniform torn and bloodied, but clutched in his hand was a stack of documents wrapped in oilcloth. O'Malley knelt down and gently took the documents. "Get those back to command, Mac. This is bigger than us." Mac hesitated. "But sir, what about the soldier?" O'Malley looked at the dead man, his face etched with weariness. "He's done his part, son. Now it's our turn. Let's move." Back at Allied headquarters, the documents were laid out on a large table. Generals, colonels, and intelligence officers crowded around, their faces grim. General Patton, his voice booming, demanded answers. "What the hell is this, gentlemen? A plan to assassinate Eisenhower? Churchill, who is behind this treachery?" A young lieutenant, sweating nervously, stepped forward. "Sir, these documents were recovered from a farmhouse near Stalag Luft 3. They were clutched in the hand of a dead German soldier." Patton frowned. "A German soldier? Why would a German soldier be protecting a plan to kill our leaders?" An intelligence officer, Colonel Davies, spoke up. "Sir, we believe this is the work of the Schwarzschlange, the Black Serpent, a rogue group within the German military." Patton slammed his fist on the table. "Those Nazi bastards! I want every member of this Black Serpent found and brought to justice. Is that clear?" The officers nodded in unison. At Stalag Luft 3, a sense of unease settled over the camp. The prisoners, sensing something was amiss, became even more withdrawn and secretive. A young American pilot, Lieutenant Miller, noticed a strange pattern in the prisoners' behavior. Every night at precisely 3:00 a.m., a group of men would gather near the latrines, whispering in hushed tones. Miller, a keen observer, couldn't understand what they were doing. He tried to approach them, but they always scattered like startled birds. One day, during roll call, Miller noticed that several prisoners were missing. He alerted the guards, but they dismissed his concerns. "They probably just went to the latrines," one of the guards sneered. But Miller knew something was wrong. These men weren't just missing, they had disappeared. That evening, as the prisoners lined up for their meager rations, Miller noticed a violent reaction from one of the men. Sergeant Johnson, a burly, normally stoic airman, suddenly erupted in anger, throwing his food on the ground and cursing the guards. "This slop is unfit for pigs," he shouted. The guards quickly subdued Johnson and dragged him away. Miller, watching in disbelief, couldn't understand what had triggered Johnson's outburst. He had always been a calm and collected man. Later that night, Miller approached Johnson in the prison infirmary. Johnson was lying on a cot, his face pale and drawn. "Johnson, what happened back there?" Miller asked. "Why did you react like that?" Johnson looked at Miller, his eyes filled with fear. "I can't talk about it," he whispered. "They're watching us." Miller frowned. "Who's watching us?" Johnson shook his head. "I can't say, just be careful, Miller. Something terrible is happening here." As Miller left the infirmary, he noticed a nurse, a young German woman named Elsa, watching him intently. Elsa, a kind and compassionate woman, had always been friendly to the prisoners, but tonight her eyes were filled with a strange sadness. Miller hesitated, wondering if he should talk to her, but he decided against it. He didn't trust anyone anymore. He felt as though he was caught in a web of secrets and lies. Back in his barrack, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. He decided to investigate the prisoners' nighttime gatherings near the latrines. He waited until everyone was asleep, then slipped out of his bed and crept towards the latrines. As he approached, he heard voices whispering in the darkness. He peered around the corner and saw a group of men huddled together, performing some kind of strange ritual. They were chanting in a language he didn't understand, and they were making strange gestures with their hands. Miller, his heart pounding in his chest, watched in disbelief. What were these men doing? What was the meaning of this bizarre ritual? He decided to get closer to try to hear what they were saying. But as he moved, he stepped on a twig, snapping it in two. The prisoners immediately stopped chanting and turned towards the sound. Miller froze, his eyes wide with fear. He had been discovered. The prisoners rushed towards him, their faces contorted with anger. Miller knew he was in trouble. He turned and ran, desperate to escape. But the prisoners were faster than him. They caught up to him and tackled him to the ground. Miller struggled against them, but they were too strong. They pinned him down and began to beat him mercilessly. Just as Miller thought he was going to die, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Nurse Elsa. She rushed towards the prisoners and began to shout at them in German. The prisoners, startled by her sudden appearance, stopped beating Miller and turned towards her. Elsa continued to shout, her voice filled with anger. The prisoners, cowed by her outburst, slowly backed away. Elsa helped Miller to his feet. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Miller nodded, his body aching with pain. "Thank you," he said. "You saved my life." Elsa looked at him, her eyes filled with a strange sadness. "You shouldn't have been spying on them," she said. "They're dangerous men." Miller frowned. "What were they doing?" he asked. "What was that ritual?" Elsa hesitated. "I can't tell you," she said. "It's too dangerous." Miller grabbed her arm. "Please," he begged. "I have to know what's going on here." Elsa looked around, making sure that no one was listening. Then she leaned in close to Miller and whispered in his ear. "They're planning something terrible," she said. "Something that could change the course of the war." Miller's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are they planning?" he asked. Elsa shook her head. "I can't tell you," she said. "But I can help you. Meet me tomorrow night at the old chapel. I'll tell you everything I know." Miller nodded. "I'll be there," he said. Elsa smiled weakly. "Be careful," she said. "They're watching us." The next day, Miller waited anxiously for nightfall. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He noticed that the prisoners were giving him strange looks and the guards seemed to be paying him extra attention. He knew that he was in danger. That evening, as darkness fell, Miller slipped out of his barrack and made his way towards the old chapel. Chapel, a crumbling stone building, was located on the outskirts of the camp. It had been abandoned for years and it was said to be haunted. Miller, his heart pounding in his chest, approached the chapel cautiously. He pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The chapel was dark and cold, filled with the smell of mildew and decay. He saw Elsa standing near the altar, her face pale and drawn. "You came," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Miller nodded. "I had to," he said. "What do you know?" Elsa took a deep breath. "The prisoners are part of a secret society," she said. "The Schwarzbrüder, the Black Brothers. They are loyal to the Black Serpent and they are planning to assassinate the Allied leaders." Miller's eyes widened in shock. "But why?" he asked. "What do they hope to gain?" Elsa shook her head. "They believe that the Allied leaders are corrupt and that they are leading the world towards destruction," she said. "They want to create a new world order, one that is based on their twisted ideology." Miller couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But how are they going to do it?" he asked. "How are they going to assassinate the Allied leaders from inside a prisoner of war camp?" Elsa pointed to a hidden door behind the altar. "They have a secret tunnel," she said. "It leads to a nearby town where they have contacts with the Black Serpent." Miller's mind raced. "A tunnel," he said. "But how did they build a tunnel without anyone noticing?" Elsa smiled grimly. "They have been working on it for months," she said. "They have been using the latrines as a cover, digging the tunnel a little bit each day." Miller was amazed. He had been living in the camp for months and he had never suspected a thing. "We have to stop them," he said. "We have to warn the Allied leaders." Elsa nodded. "I know," she said, "but it's not going to be easy. The Black Brothers are powerful and they have eyes and ears everywhere. We can't trust anyone." Miller thought for a moment. "What about the guards?" he asked. "Can we trust them?" Elsa shook her head. "Some of them are corrupt," she said. "They are working with the Black Brothers." Miller felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by enemies. He didn't know who to trust. "What do we do?" he asked. Elsa took his hand. "We fight," she said. "We fight for our freedom and we fight for the future of the world." Suddenly they heard a noise outside the chapel, the sound of footsteps approaching rapidly. Elsa's eyes widened in fear. "They're here," she whispered. "They know we're here." Miller grabbed his pistol. "We have to get out of here," he said. Elsa shook her head. "It's too late," she said. "We're surrounded." The door to the chapel burst open and a group of men rushed inside. They were all wearing German uniforms, but Miller recognized their faces. They were the prisoners from the latrines, the members of the Black Brothers. The leader of the group, a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. "Hello, Miller," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "We've been expecting you." Miller raised his pistol. "Stay back," he said. "I don't want to hurt you." The leader laughed. "You can't stop us," he said. "We are the future." Miller fired his pistol, hitting one of the Black Brothers in the chest. The man screamed and fell to the ground, dead. The other Black Brothers opened fire, riddling Miller's body with bullets. Miller collapsed to the floor, dead. Elsa watched in horror as Miller was killed. She knew that she was next. The leader of the Black Brothers approached her, his eyes filled with hate. "You betrayed us," he said. "You will pay the price." He raised his hand and slapped Elsa across the face. Elsa fell to the ground, her cheeks stinging with pain. The leader of the Black Brothers kicked her in the stomach. Elsa groaned and curled up into a fetal position. The leader of the Black Brothers raised his foot to kick her again. But before he could, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Stop!" the voice shouted. The leader of the Black Brothers turned towards the sound. Standing in the doorway was Nurse Greta. Greta raised her pistol and pointed it at the leader of the Black Brothers. "Let her go," she said, her voice trembling with anger. The leader of the Black Brothers laughed. "You can't stop us, Greta," he said. "We are too powerful." Greta shook her head. "I won't let you kill her," she said. "I won't let you destroy the world." She fired her pistol, hitting the leader of the Black Brothers in the shoulder. The leader screamed in pain and staggered backwards. The other Black Brothers opened fire on Greta, riddling her body with bullets. Greta fell to the floor, dead, but as she fell, she managed to fire one last shot. The bullet struck the hidden door behind the altar, shattering the lock. The hidden door swung open, revealing the entrance to the secret tunnel. The Black Brothers, stunned by Greta's sacrifice, hesitated for a moment. Elsa seized the opportunity and scrambled to her feet. She ran towards the open tunnel and disappeared into the darkness. The Black Brothers, realizing what had happened, rushed after her, but it was too late. Elsa was gone. Deep inside the tunnel, Elsa stumbled blindly through the darkness. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she had to escape. She had to warn the Allied leaders about the Black Serpent's assassination plot. She ran for what seemed like hours, her body aching with exhaustion. Finally, she reached the end of the tunnel. She pushed open a hidden door and emerged into the darkness outside. She found herself in a small, deserted forest. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. She didn't know where she was or which direction to go. She was alone, wounded, and hunted. But she wasn't going to give up. She was going to find a way to warn the Allied leaders, even if it cost her her life. As she began to walk, she noticed a strange symbol carved into a nearby tree. It was the symbol of the Black Serpent, the stylized image of a serpent coiled around a sword. Elsa's heart sank. She realized that she wasn't as far away from the Black Brothers as she thought. They were still watching her, still hunting her. She knew that she had to be careful. She couldn't trust anyone. She was alone in a world of enemies. As she continued to walk, she began to notice other symbols carved into the trees. The symbols seemed to be leading her somewhere. But where? She didn't know. She just followed the symbols.